Hello, everyone. On the 29th of July, the PragerU Twitter account posted this tweet, which says, and it quotes said activist as saying, and if we click through, we see a video of a supposed civil rights activist participating in some sort of staged use of force training intended to prove that the police just have to kill people. They can't help it. Never mind all those other countries with different police tactics where the police don't kill a fraction of the people as in the United States. Anyway, that aside, PragerU comments on this video about police tactics by saying, "So that's simple. Comply with the police or they can kill you is the message, of course." Simple enough. And I'd like to compare that quote to this other tweet from PragerU posted on the 16th of July. There is a point at which law-abiding follows neither logic nor morality. From the 1930s Germany dissenters to Rosa Parks, history is full of noble examples of civil disobedience. Dennis Prager reflects on the difficult question of when it's time to take a stand. And the video posted with the tweet is of Dennis Prager doing one of his fireside chats in which he states that he would disobey a law requiring him to use a mask outdoors. Yes, Dennis Prager is the next Rosa Parks ague. And, watching this clip, I was reminded of the following bit of advice given in the PragerU video, "Cops are the good guys." Now, PragerU's position here, you've probably already noticed, seems a little contradictory, doesn't it? On the one hand, they re-saying that you have a duty to follow the law and obey commands from the police even if you disagree. And on the other, they re-saying that actually, disobeying laws you disagree with can be very noble and awesome and it's a good thing to break them. Now, this seeming hypocrisy should prompt a question. This seeming hypocrisy should prompt a question. If a police officer came up to Dennis Prager outside and ordered him to put on a mask, would he do it? I mean, he says that he wouldn't do it because he disagrees with the policy. He thinks it's absurd. But his website and YouTube channel are plastered in messages saying that you should always obey the police even if you disagree with their commands. So how do we explain this discrepancy? Now, we could just say that Dennis Prager is a hypocrite who thinks that laws are for other people but he should get to do whatever he likes, right? Which, to be fair, is probably at least partially true. But we'd be missing something there, I think, because this isn't just an individual level Dennis Prager problem. There's a deeper point to be made here about how conservatives across the board view the concept of the law. And to explore this a little more, I want to take a look at a couple of points from a few different PragerU videos now. And we'll stick with "Cops are the good guys" for a minute. So, just before the narrator starts talking about how you should always obey the police even if you disagree, he says the following. It is this lack of respect for authority, fostered over decades by the progressive left and its fear the police narrative, that has led to the needless deaths of so many young black men. When Officer Darren Wilson told Michael Brown to get out of the middle of the street in Ferguson, Missouri, did Brown comply? No. When officers in Baltimore told Freddie Gray to stop resisting arrest, did he comply? No. When officers in New York City told Eric Garner to stop resisting arrest, did he comply? No. So when he then goes on to talk about obeying the police being a matter of life and death, it's explicitly in the context of the deaths of these black men who were killed by the police. And there's a couple of important points to be made here. Firstly is that Dennis Prager, as an old rich white man, can be reasonably sure that if he were to disobey an order from the police, they would be unlikely, relatively speaking anyway, to immediately murder him. When he talks about being willing to accept the consequences of disobeying the law, he's not imagining himself being shot or choked to death, is he? He's imagining that consequence being, at most probably, a fine. He's not imagining the sorts of things that happen to black people when they tell the police no. So there's an obvious double standard here, isn't there? How you react can be a matter of life or death is obviously more true for certain sections of the population than for others. Dennis Prager is willing to accept his own consequences, but he wouldn't be willing to accept Freddie Gray's consequences or Eric Garner's consequences. Now, the other double standard going on here is between the victims of police violence and the police themselves. Freddie Gray, for instance, was killed while in police custody. His death was ruled a homicide after he was handcuffed and placed unrestrained in the back of a police van, which was then driven around, during which time Gray received fatal injuries. Gray not being secured with a seat belt while in the van was against the police department's policies. The cops who were arresting Gray didn't follow their own rules, and as a result of that, they caused his death. Similarly, Eric Garner was killed after being subjected to a chokehold, something which is prohibited by NAPT regulations. The police officer who put Garner in the chokehold was later fired for it, with an investigating judge writing that his use of a chokehold fell so far short of objective reasonableness that this tribunal found it to be reckless, a gross deviation from the standard of conduct established for a New York City police officer. And they also accuse him of being untruthful and disingenuous in his interviews with investigators. But cops are the good guys, remember. What we learn about PragerU's point of view here is that police should not be expected to have to act according to their own rules, so long as they are serving their function within the conservative system. And the function the police are serving here is to enforce an order, a hierarchical social order, one with the conservative in-group at the top and their out-groups at the bottom. When conservatives demand compliance, it rarely has anything to do with the law as it is written. Much more often, what they are demanding is compliance with this social hierarchy. And I'd like to show you a very explicit example of what I'm talking about. Back in September of 2019, in relation to the ongoing argument over the Trump administration's family separation policy, conservative political commentator and regular PragerU contributor Candace Owens posted the following tweet. Now, absent here is what Candace Owens actually thinks about the policy in question. Is it a just policy? Is the punishment for breaking it proportional? Is it fair to separate families who are just seeking asylum and put them through this horrible experience? I mean, no, right. It's awful. Taking children from their families and putting them in child prison, it's a very villainous behavior. It's difficult to defend. So what Owens does instead is shift the responsibility for this horrible thing to the victims of the horrible thing by hiding behind the law. They re only being punished because they broke the law, she claims. Whether the law is just or unjust doesn't matter here. The law is the law. Do not break the law. Now, I find this a very narrow-minded and cowardly point of view, obviously. Gesturing to the concept of lawfulness to avoid confronting the consequences of the policies you support is a cop-out, obviously, if you'll pardon the pun. It's also a seemingly unusual line of defense in this case. Anyway, because seeking asylum at an international border is not actually against the law to begin with. So invoking the law here is a little strange. In many cases, no laws have been broken. Anyway, I want to compare this tweet to another tweet from Candace Owens, now one from December of 2020 concerning coronavirus lockdown orders. For years, I have used my platform to hashtag back the blue when the media and left-wing politicians baselessly attack LEOs, that's law enforcement officers. Now it's time to discover if the blue backs us. I stand with every business owner who is opening their doors in defiance of tyrannical Democrat lockdowns. So this tweet was posted in relation to a news story about a restaurant owner in Michigan who was keeping his restaurant open for indoor dining despite lockdown orders. A not to do that on account of the corona hardly pointed story does keep it video Terry bio 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 I or and as a result of that, he was fined by the government. So we have to ask why Candace Owens responded so differently in this case. These orders were lawful orders issued by democratically elected leaders. If Candace Owens was being consistent in her beliefs, she would say if you re a restaurant owner who doesn't want to be fined, just on to break the law, right. But she doesn't do that here. She does just the opposite, in fact, and expresses support for business owners defying the lockdown. She also cites her own support of the police in her call for them to stand with the business owners by not enforcing the law. The actual written law is obviously a distant second here to enforcing the hierarchy. A hierarchy in which business owners rank highly and thus should be protected by the police even as they break the law, but asylum seekers rank lowly and thus should be punished as if they have broken the law even if they haven't. I'd like now to take a look at a similar example from the PragerU video, What Do We Do About the Homeless? And we can see the in-group versus out-group mindset very clearly right from the title here. What do we do about the homeless? This video makes the disgusting argument that homelessness is some sort of individual moral failing or, like, just some bad decision people are making, and the solution is, of course, to get to on homelessness. And they judge success not by housing homeless people or improving their lives somehow, but by making them go away, basically. Now, there's a good video by the YouTube channel Thought Slime which goes into this video in more detail than I'm going to, and I'll link that below in the video description if you'd like to check it out. What I want to focus on in my video is the following clip. Make your city attractive for the homeless, and they'll beat a path to your doorway. The Venice Boulevard underpass on the border of Los Angeles and Culver City brings home this point. It's one of thousands of concrete structures in Los Angeles County, but there's a curious detail. The Los Angeles side is full of tents, and the Culver City side is empty. Why? Because the two cities have different public policies. Los Angeles has effectively decriminalized public camping and drug consumption, while Culver City enforces the law. So, firstly, let's take this series of statements at face value and imagine they re true. They re not true, but for the moment, we all pretend right. And you might already see a problem here. The two cities have different public policies. Los Angeles has effectively decriminalized public camping and drug consumption, while Culver City enforces the law. Now, what does this mean with regards to the law? If LA did actually decriminalize public camping and drug consumption, then they wouldn't be failing to enforce the law by not treating people as criminals for doing those things. Because they wouldn't be criminal acts, would they? This PragerU video appears to take the position that camping under an underpass is, by default, illegal, according to some sort of objective, universal truth that supersedes what the actual written laws are. And this all gets weirder when we look into the source for their claim about the Venice Boulevard underpass, and that's An La Times article from June 2019 titled "Neighboring Cities Are Pushing Homeless into Law," councilman alleged. The U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled last year that homeless individuals may not be held criminally responsible for sleeping on government property when no alternative shelter is available. City Council member Mike Bonin, whose council district touches Santa Monica, Culver City, and El Segundo, said he believes many cities in the region are not complying with that decision. Instead of allowing people to sleep on their sidewalks, they encouraging people or compelling people to move to the city of Los Angeles to do that, he said. Such a disparity can be seen on Venice Boulevard at the 405 freeway, Bonin said, with homeless people on the La side of the street but not on the Culver City side. People are understandably asking why the hell, that is, Bonin said, and it. Now this is interesting, isn't it? PragerU's source here contains the exact opposite claim that they make in their video. They say that LA is not enforcing the law while Culver City is, but their source for that information, and La City Council member quoted in the La Times, claims that the disparity in homeless populations between those two places was because La was complying with the law and Culver City wasn't. The article even quotes someone who has been living under the underpass who say so. Firstly, PragerU's overall point is ridiculous, obviously. Even if they were right here, Culver City wouldn't have solved homelessness just by forcing all the homeless people to go somewhere else. And if LADOs, air quotes, enforce the law in a similar way and also start forcing all the homeless people to go elsewhere, that wouldn't solve anything either. And coincidentally, LA did actually recently take measures to criminalize homelessness, which, coupled with the suspension on evictions due to the coronavirus being allowed to expire, seems particularly cruel. Of course, getting tough on homelessness is not actually about addressing homelessness. It's about enforcing the same hierarchy that we talked about earlier. Homeless people, like asylum seekers, are low down in the conservative hierarchy and thus just are illegal intrinsically all the time. From the conservative perspective, enforcing the law here means punishing homeless people and punishing asylum seekers, regardless of what the actual law is or if it was broken. They below us on the ladder, which means we kick them in the head. That's the point. This isn't a means to an end. It's just the end. And I'm reminded of the story of the Trump voter who, feeling let down by his administration, expressed their disappointment by saying he's not hurting the people he needs to be hurting, revealing that they supported Trump specifically because they wanted him to hurt people. They just didn't think the one being hurt would be them. I'd like to move on now and talk about how this conservative view of the law interacts with the partisan political divide. But one thing I'd like to make clear first here is that when I've been saying conservative today, I do not mean Republican, as in the Republican Party in the United States. Now, there's a lot of overlap there, of course, but the Republicans by no means have a monopoly on this sort of hierarchical in-group, out-group thinking. PragerU and their Republican commentators obviously try to weaponize law and order narratives against the Democrats, painting them as weak on crime and so on. But this does not mean that the Democrats are not just as able to use the same conservative messaging, as we just saw with the Democratic mayor of LA cracking down on homelessness. Not that PragerU cares much, of course. The particular rhetorical trick they use to score points against the Democrats is this. If the leader is a Republican, then the laws are just the law, innately. Whereas if the leader is a Democrat, laws are called Democrat laws, and they re-described as absurd or biased or tyrannical. And there's certainly something to be said here about how PragerU swapped from saying follow the law without question under a Republican president to not following the law makes you like Rosa Parks, actually, right around the time a Democrat came into office. I'd like now to take a look at another PragerU video titled "Is Voter Fraud Real?", which opens with the following statement. While the major media fixates on the influence of foreign powers on American elections, a much more serious attack has been taking place right under our noses. Good, old-fashioned, homegrown voter fraud. Let's look at 3 of the worst offenses. And then it goes on to talk about all the terrible voter fraud that is probably for sure happening wherever Republicans happen to not be winning elections. Right. Shockingly, the video does actually mention the hypothetical possibility of Republican corruption. However, all the actual examples of supposed voter fraud contained within the video are in places where Democrats won elections over their Republican rivals. And we see in this video the same disconnect between the conservative ideal of the law and the actual law. The second of their voter fraud examples is to complain about California legalizing, quote, the practice of ballot solicitation, saying organizations are legally permitted to go to a location, say a nursing home or a church, and collect ballots. Now, this seems obvious, of course, but if this practice is legal, as they state, then it wouldn't be voter fraud, would it? Because it would be legal. What PragerU are actually concerned about here is a possible altering of the votes after they've been collected, but that doesn't make the collecting of the votes fraud if it's legal to do so, does it? They also lay the blame for ballot harvesting specifically at the feet of the left, or who they think the left is anyway, saying it's one of the, quote, ways in which the left creates a clear advantage for itself on election day. And in light of that, quote, let me just read you a brief news story here. California Republicans embrace legally dubious ballot harvesting after Trump and the GOP spent months decrying the practice. The California Republican Party doubled down on its use of unauthorized ballot drop boxes, potentially in violation of state law, shortly before state officials issued cease and desist orders compelling them to stop. Election officials are investigating and addressing multiple instances in Los Angeles, Orange, and Fresno counties of Republicans setting up unauthorized drop boxes for their voters' mail ballots. The state Republican Party defended itself on Twitter by citing California law allowing third-party ballot collection, but officials have noted that state law clearly prohibits drop boxes not established by election officials. Anyway, I wouldn't blame anyone for thinking voter fraud is an odd crime for PragerU to be concerned about to begin with, given their frequent collaborations with Dinesh D'Souza. Given their for why, for period of you now, D'Souza, narrator of several PragerU videos, such as Are Some Cultures Better Than Others? Capitalism or Socialism? Which one is more democratic? And is fascism right or left? Who knows? In addition to being the narrator of these PragerU videos, Dinesh D'Souza, also a convicted felon who pled guilty to committing election fraud by way of making illegal campaign contributions. Preo, De Souza was sentenced to 8 months in a community confinement center, 5 years probation, and to pay a $30,000 fine. So when PragerU say election fraud has been taking place right under their noses, well, yes, it has. Now, I'd like to end today with a quote. This quote is often attributed to American political scientist Francis M. Willhite, but upon investigation it appears it was actually posted in the comments of an internet blog several years after Francis M. Willhite died by a different fellow by the name of Frank Willhite. And that's one way to secure yourself a memorable quote, isn't it? Just have a very similar name to a famous political scientist. Anyway, internet blog comment or no. I like the quote, so there you go. Thanks a lot for watching today, folks. And thank you especially to me supporters over on Patreon, some of whom should be scrolling by right now. Patrons get early access to all me videos, which I'm told is a high so incredibly thrilling that the remainder of your life will appear drab and boring by comparison. Seems a little exaggerated to but that's what I am told, apparently. Someone told me that. You can't prove they didn't.